Hi everyone and welcome to NYC Geek Society, and we're introducing a new feature here on the channel. And what we do here is we're going to review classic science fiction movies, ones that I grew up with, but John hasn't seen. A lot of people his age have not seen. And for our first one, we're going to do a classic movie, one of the best science fiction movies, definitely one of the most influential science fiction movies of the 1950s. A major influence of what happened for decades afterwards. And that movie is 1956 Forbidden Planet. And it was a big game changer in a lot of ways. Now, it wasn't the best, it wasn't definitely not the best science fiction movie of the 1950s. I think that would be The Day the Earth Stood Still, which came out in 1951.
Which I also haven't seen yet.
Right, so we'll put that on the list. But to me, that's the greatest of the 1950s films. But Forbidden Planet is important because of what happened afterwards and how it influenced so many things. If it wasn't for Forbidden Planet, we probably would not have Star Trek as we know it today. Lost in Space. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Keep that in mind, that was production began on that 8-9 years after Forbidden Planet. So it had a huge impact because for the most part, science fiction movies before Forbidden Planet were grade B movies, and especially in the 1950s, which with some notable exceptions, there was a whole Cold War paranoia going on, the whole nuclear effects going on. So you had all these monster movies because of what was going on with nuclear bombs. You had the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. You saw the trailer for that. You had them. You had the Flying Mantis. You had all these giant creature movies, and the list went on and on.
The original The Thing.
The original The Thing, yes, but that was a bit different. That didn't feed into the Cold War paranoia, except for the fact that it's an alien presence. And of course, there was a big paranoia in this country over infiltration by the Soviets during the Cold War. That's what Invasion of the Body Snatchers is about also. Invaders from Mars are allegorical to the Cold War paranoia that was occurring in this country. Don't forget, this is the time of the Red Scare. So that was very much on everybody's minds, and science fiction definitely played into that. Forbidden Planet is special because it doesn't really fall into that category. There's something very Lovecraftian about Forbidden Planet. Now, while we'll talk a few plot points here in a few moments. All right, now the basic setup of Forbidden Planet is very much like Shakespeare's The Tempest, where you have Prospero on this exiled on his island, the sorcerer with his daughter. But the similarities sort of end there. They're not that deep.
Right, yeah.
And he has a servant, two servants, Ariel and Caliban, in the play. But what I said about it being Lovecraftian is that Lovecraft deals a lot with forbidden knowledge and what happens when you delve into forbidden knowledge. And definitely one of the basic themes of Forbidden Planet is not so much Cold War paranoia, but the fear of, is man ready for technology? Is man with their most base instincts capable of handling the new technology that was emerging at the time, which was nuclear power and nuclear weapons. So I think that definitely plays into what Forbidden Planet is about. What did you feel when you were watching it?
Yeah, so the basic plot is, Starship is going to the planet because there was a team of scientists that had gone there, what was it, like 3 years before? 20 years, 20 right. Years. It was like 20 years before. Right. And they were just basically going to, their mission was to check in and see why they never replied or said anything.
Sounds like a Star Trek plot, doesn't
right.
it?
And it actually reminded me a lot of, I think it was the second episode of Star Trek. I don't remember the name of the episodes, but where Kirk and Bones go to the planet where it's just the man and his wife, and
Right.
Bones used to date the
Right.
wife,
Mm-hmm.
and then it ends up being not what it seems. It reminded me a lot of that episode, and I wonder how much of that episode was influenced by Forbidden Planet as well.
Well, Roddenberry definitely was influenced by Forbidden Planet. I mean, they have a federation
Right.
of planets also in Forbidden Planet.
I mean, even when I was watching it, I was actually thinking about, you could just easily say that Forbidden Planet is part of the Star Trek universe, and there really wouldn't be anything,
Absolutely.
that would be disparate about that.
And while much is made about Kirk and Pike from Star Trek being based on Horatio Hornblower, fictional nautical sea captain, British captain, from a series of novels that I grew up with, Hornblower novels. When you see Forbidden Planet, you see he is more like Leslie Nielsen's J.J. Adams, Captain J.J. Adams, like informing the crew what's going on. And also, it's very much like a submarine, which was what the first season of Star Trek felt like. They were in a submarine.
Yeah.
You were saying with the plot.
But, I mean, I don't want to give too much away, I guess, for people like myself.
Spoilers for a movie that's...
Right. But, I mean, I don't want to give away too much, but basically it goes into some philosophical ideas, like you said, about, basically is mankind able to, responsibly deal with powerful technology. Mm-hmm. And that's really the main philosophical idea that the movie's trying to pose. But it doesn't really go too deeply into it. It's more spectacle than, depth, I thought. Mm-hmm. Whereas, Star Trek becomes a bit more deep on these sort of philosophical ideas, as well as has some action and spectacle. But that being said, the special effects for a movie made in the 50s is really incredible. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, it's not as far off from what you would see in a modern independent sci-fi film, now.
No, a lot of the effects hold up pretty well.
Yeah. And so I actually did want to ask you a question about that. Like, what was it? Was it just essentially... There was obviously some animation there with, like, the laser effects.
Right.
But was it mostly just film imposed upon film? Like, how did they get those shots of, like, the big underground lab with, like, these huge cylindrical things and...
Well, back then I used to use different processes. And one of the things I used to do was glass paintings, which actually... were used until pretty much the early 90s, I would assume. So what happens is you had the Krell technology, and you had the figures walking, right? So what happens is you would shoot the figures from a distance, right? Uh-huh. But in front of the camera would be this elaborate glass painting that would obscure everything else around it except for those figures in the distance. So it looks like they're walking in this gigantic facility, but actually that's a whole glass.
So it's not even like a green screen or anything. It's a painting.
It's a glass painting. It was used in Star Wars. In the scene where Obi-Wan Kenobi disconnects the force field on the Death Star, and it looks like he's in that chasm. That's a glass painting. So it was used all the time, especially in movies that needed artificial landscapes or these things like needed gigantic ships. So some of it was glass painting. Disney animators were involved in making the special effects. Those were cell animations. So there was a lot of that stuff was animated, and that's the only way they could do it back then. There was no CG, and there really wasn't. There weren't that many options.
Yeah, for the most part, it was very subtle, and I was very impressed by the cinematography in general. Like there were some, like I said to you while we were watching, there were some scenes that were genuinely unsettling and creepy, and I didn't. It's like what you said. When I think sci-fi from the 50s, I think of stuff that's B movie, you know, and not really that impressive by today's standards. But this, it was spooky, you know, it was creepy. You felt the presence there from like, you know, this creature that you couldn't see, you know?
Well, you felt the danger from an invisible creature.
Right.
But there was also this overwhelming technology that was all around the characters. And don't forget, they're seen very small. But I think we should explain the plot a little bit more like you were doing.
Sure.
Yeah, you started it.
So you want to go into spoiler territory then?
Well, it's the movie's almost 60 years old.
I mean, I didn't know.
But it's 60 years old.
But basically, what the plot ends up evolving into is that there was an original crew that was landed on the planet, and all of them died except for this doctor and his wife at the time. And the wife had since passed away from natural causes, but they have a 19-year-old daughter that's there too. And they seem to be immune from whatever was killing the other people that colonized or came to the planet.
The other scientists were dying in horrific ways.
Right.
They're being torn limb from limb.
Right.
Without explanation.
Right. And what it turns out is that there had been discovered remains of an alien civilization.
The Krells.
The Krells that had gone extinct many, I think, thousands years prior
2,000 years before.
Okay. Prior to them landing there. And the doctor had been sort of tinkering with the technology that they found and ended up boosting his IQ. And that ended up being the differential between him and the other people that came to this planet. So there was already something suspicious there of like, why isn't this guy dead? You know, and why isn't his daughter dead? And it turns out that the Krell had evolved to the point where they were very peaceful and knowledgeable, and they basically are the pinnacle of what humanity hopes to eventually evolve to. And so they felt that the next step was to be able to be completely independent of physical form. And so they were working on a technology that could do that. And what ended up happening, though, is that when they released from
their subconscious,
from their physical forms, and it also unleashed, it unlocked the parts of their brains that was the subconscious, that was the primal being as well, and they basically became these monsters, and that's what was happening to this doctor as well, that ended up the creature that was now attacking the crew that had landed there was part of his subconscious that was killing everybody. And, so it's basically talking about, the primal man and, but it's heavily about technology that, do we get to a point where we should just stop because we could end up unlocking some horror that we're not aware of, and that's the main question. Now, what I found really interesting but unsatisfying watching the film is that the film literally ends saying, well, when humanity evolves to this point, now we'll know that we're not gods. And it ended up basically kind of felt like saying, like, hey, all the religious people watching this, like, you're right that technology is evil, Well,
I don't know if it goes that far.
It sort of was,
but it ties in with, like I said, the climate of the Cold War, where the idea that we can't be trusted with a lot of this technology.
Which also reminded me, I don't remember the name of it, of a Twilight Zone episode that I really like. That's about this guy that discovers this town that seems to be sectioned off from everyone else, and there ends up being an invisible force field where you can't leave. It turned out that aliens had come to that town and given them technology, but the leaders of that town realized that the rest of the world were going to use it possibly for evil. But basically, I guess what I'm saying is that where Star Trek, again, is maybe even too optimistic, it basically is saying that humanity, through technology, just keeps doing good things eventually. Where this was actually saying that, and maybe actually it is more realistic, that there's the capacity for good as well as the capacity for evil with technology.
Well, that's the thing. Like nuclear weapons at the time of the way they're being sold to the public was that something that's technology that's meant to be peaceful can be your undoing as well.
Right.
So I mean that's the basic theme of this science fiction movie, which on the surface just looks like some colorful kids science fiction movie, which it's not. It's far from it. Now, did I get all these themes when I was a kid? No, I got into Robbie the Robot, who was introduced in this movie and who is definitely one of the best artificial characters ever invented.
So I want to ask you about that as well with Robbie the Robot. It even says in the opening credits introducing Robbie the Robot like he's an actor.
Well, he's important.
So that was in other movies and television shows?
After.
Was that part of like a cinematic universe or something? Or
no.
How was that explained?
He was used. It was almost like an actor.
So he was like he was an actor?
Yeah, Robbie was built for Forbidden Planet, and he was the most expensive prop ever built up to that time.
So MGM wanted to reuse it.
Well, if you spend $175,000 on something back then, you're going to keep using it. But he was popular. So he did television appearances. He appeared on all sorts of TV shows, even Lost in Space, with the same creator created both robots. And now he's in a private collection, but he appeared in tons of things because Robbie is cool and Robbie is awesome.
Was it the same actors that in the suit and the voice that did it?
No, there was a voiceover actor. I forget his name, but he did that great voice for Robbie. There were different. I don't know if there were dwarves or midgets that were in the suit, but one of them got fired for being drunk and almost knocking the entire suit over.
Oh my god!
During production.
Horrifying.
Well, I mean, it was an expensive prop.
Yeah.
You didn't want it to get destroyed. But Forbidden Planet had a lot of firsts. First miniskirt in a movie, in a Hollywood movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So.
I mean, that was visually appealing for sure.
Yes.
What was her name? Frances?
And Frances.
Yeah, she was
stunning. She
was incredible. Mm-hmm. I couldn't get over how Leslie Nielsen looked as well.
Yeah, he was incredibly handsome.
I mean,
he was very handsome.
I've always known him as like this old white-haired guy in comedy movies.
Yeah. No, he was incredibly handsome.
He was a good-looking guy.
Yeah, and the crew was a lot of fun. And again, it's reminiscent to Star Trek when you look at them. Now, one thing that they
were cracking jokes. I was surprised how funny it was.
Well, initially, MGM thought the script was a little too serious. So they had the writers introduce the cook character, Earl Holliman, as the boozy cook.
Right. Who always had his cook hat and apron on. Even when he was walking around an alien planet.
Right. So he was a comedy relief, and he's pretty good. He's fun.
Yeah.
And he played off of Robbie very well.
Yeah. I wanted to also ask about the flying saucer design. I looked up a little bit before we made this video, but it seems like Forbidden Planet was one of the first movies to have a flying saucer in it, I think.
Well, there were others. I mean,
around the same time.
Well, the first movie with a flying saucer was called The Flying Saucer.
Right.
From 1950. But when you watch the Day the Earth Stood Still, that's a flying saucer as well.
And what was that?
1951. So, I mean, flying saucers were already in a consciousness mind, and And, they already related it to science fiction. And the same art director that worked on Forbidden Planet worked on Lost in Space later, which is why probably the Jupiter 7 is also a flying saucer. So, like I said, flying saucers and science fiction kind of went hand in hand.
Yeah, it's interesting that people have talked about it also, that the front of the the Starship Enterprise is essentially
a saucer.
Flying saucer.
Yeah, is a saucer,
Yeah.
So, I mean, Forbidden Planet definitely influenced Roddenberry tremendously when you watch the two. And if you get a chance to watch it, you definitely should. And this was important, not because it was the best, but because of its influence that it had. And there were very few movies, science fiction movies, for adults before this. When you see the trailers, you see who they're appealing to. Even with Forbidden Planet, they're kind of appealing to this teen audience that's going to go to the movies on Saturdays. So if they're not overly grim, say like War of the Worlds or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, they were all kind of serious, like The Day There Stood Still, but that's even in black and white. This was a big budget. This was nearly $2 million at the time.
Wow.
And it wasn't a huge financial success, but it did break even. But I think it showed that there was an audience for better science fiction movies. Because, like I said, when you look at the era, no other real movie looks like this.
Something that I wanted to ask you about is the movie had a very episodic feel to it. Again, it kind of felt like an episode from Star Trek to me. And it had a very abrupt ending. Mm-hmm. Do you know, was there ever a plan to make sequels to it or have it be part of a bigger universe? Or it just felt like this was just a piece of a universe that could be developed on. It
could have been, but that was never the intention. Irving Blocker wrote the original story and submitted it to MGM. Expected it to be a B movie. In fact, he didn't even expect it to get any traction at all. He was a visual effects artist. So, and he used to write for themselves, essentially, and make these movies. Anyway, so he didn't think it was going to get any traction at all, and it ended up being this big production. So there was no thought of expanding it beyond its length.
Why did it end so abruptly? It just kind of
the story is that when they previewed it for audiences, it previewed so well, and audiences loved it so much, they released it as it was. They didn't tweak it anymore. They just released it as it is, so it almost has these slight, like, weird cuts and jumps like a work print does. Yeah. But they just, at least that's the story, that they just released it as it was. They didn't feel I needed anything else.
Interesting.
And, watching the deleted scenes, I like those deleted scenes. Some of them I think would have added to the film.
One other thing that I wanted to talk about, and maybe you've already kind of answered it in a way, is I thought that they never really went into the impact of death. They kind of brush it off throughout the movie. Mm-hmm. Like, even when, like, the father dies, she just goes, "Oh no," and then, like, they go to the captain and her living on the ship, and then she sees her planet that she's lived on her whole life get exploded, and he just hugs her. Mm-hmm. He's like, "Well, it'll be a good lesson for our species thousands of years from now." But, like, even when they talk about the crew that had been killed, the doctor's crew, and then when, like, one of the main characters in the movie dies, and they barely even talk about it, they just have him writing a letter to, like, or no, it's just, here's his belongings, ship him out, and they just keep talking on with the plot. Right. Is it just because it was meant to be a B movie, or it was meant, or was it that they didn't want it to be too serious?
I think there's a lot of things at play here.
Because one of the things that
dwelling on an individual death definitely halts the plot.
Well, one of the things I always liked about Star Trek is Kirk always mourns and gets angry off of even every red shirt, just random extra that dies in the show. you feel the weight of that, of being a ship's captain, that he sent these men there, and then they died. And I always thought that it didn't really take much time. You would show that he was upset, but they just kind of, you just think for timing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, like I said, if you stop to mourn every death, it holds the plot a little bit. But also you got to think of, these were different people at the time. You know, these are the people that were in the film, people that wrote the film, lived through World War II. Some of them participated in World War II. And don't forget, the millions and millions of people that died during the war. You always knew somebody who died. You knew of a family who had their sons dying. I mean, think about it. The population of the United States was maybe, 148 million? And the United States lost about almost 400,000 soldiers dead in the war. So it's like death was definitely around in a big part of the 40s. And that's why film noir was so popular in the late 1940s. Everything got darker because the world got darker in the years after World War II. There was a darker view. And again, nuclear technology was supposed to be the future in the early 1950s, but people were paranoid about it. That's why they responded to these movies so well. So you see that at the end, after World War I as well. There was these silent movies were very, very dark for almost a decade before things started brightening up or becoming comedic, very comedic. Because even when you watch the Charlie Chaplin silence of the 1920s in the post-World War I era, they're kind of sad. Yeah,
modern time.
Yeah, they're kind of sad. So the same thing happened after World War II. And again, you can understand that people, death was viewed differently back then. I'm not going to say entirely, but people responded to it differently than they do today.
It was just more common.
I wouldn't want to say that it's more common, but I think people were probably more accepting of it than they are today. Now we're entitled to live forever. At least that's what we feel. And that wasn't the case with the generation that lived through the Great Depression and World War II. And so I think that definitely has an impact on everything. So
that's interesting.
So, like I said, this is a review and a discussion of this film. A lot of it's not going to make any sense unless you actually watch the film, which is what we want to encourage you to do. At least I want, because it's important for me, for people who've never seen these films, to see it. Because, when you watch something like Star Wars, and I have this theory, which I've told John about, where people are post-Star Wars and they ignore what happened before. But, for films like Forbidden Planet have a huge impact on everything that came afterward. There probably would not have been a Star Trek without Forbidden Planet. There wouldn't have been a 2001: A Space Odyssey without Forbidden Planet. And those things are very important. And so, if you get a chance to watch it, I highly recommend it. Like I said, it's not the best science fiction movie of the 1950s, but it's definitely important. And you got to see where modern sci-fi comes from. You watch Forbidden Planet.
All right, so this has been NYC Geek Society. Like, share, subscribe. Tell your mom. Tell your dad.
They're not going to care.
Tell your Robbie the robot.
Robbie might care.
Tell Robbie. All right, geek out.
Imagine yourself as one of the crew of this faster-than-light spaceship of the future, sharing their curiosity to know the unknown, their tension, their readiness for inconceivable adventures.
Sir, we're being radar scanned. United Planets Cruiser C-57D, J.J. Adams commanding. Who are you?
Morbius of the Bellerophon.
Oh, Dr. Morbius, my orders are to survey the situation on Altair 4.
Commander, if you set down on this planet, I warn you that I cannot be answerable for the safety of your ship or your crew.
When you reach the Forbidden Planet, you will meet Dr. Morbius, played by Walter Pidgeon. The doctor is sole owner of this fabulous world. Anne Francis is his alluring daughter, Alta, who has never seen a young man till she meets Commander Adams, played by talented Leslie Nielsen.
Come on in.
Didn't bring my bathing suit.
What's a bathing suit?
Oh, murder.
You will meet a charming character in The Robot, able to produce, on order, 10 tons of lead or a slinky evening gown. Always at your service.
It must be the loveliest, softest thing you've ever made for me. And fit in all the right places. With lots and lots of star sapphires.
Star sapphires take a week to crystallize properly. Would diamond or emeralds do?
You explore all the wonders of a vanished civilization. You travel deep down into the heart of the Forbidden Planet to discover the incredible marvels of this lost genius race. These magnificent scenes in striking Eastman color stagger the imagination.
20 miles. Look down, gentlemen. Are you afraid? 7,800 level.
Yet the wonders of the planet Altair 4 conceal a strange and evil force, unknown, irresistible.